Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of LangBytes, your podcast about careers in computational linguistics. Today, we have the honor, the privilege to be talking to Lex Konnely. They completed their Ph.D. in linguistics at the University of Toronto in 2023, where they specialize in sociolinguistics and discourse analysis. And always technologically curious, Lex supported the early studies as a linguist by doing freelance computer repairs and dabbling in technological necromancy, mostly bringing old record players and Gameboys back to life. And following the releases of increasingly advanced large language models that radically change humans' capabilities to communicate with computers, and simultaneously exciting and troublesome expansion in potential applications of this technology, they saw an opportunity to be an advocate for linguistics and humanity in the industry. Now they work as a language engineering team lead and research and development linguist at Meta, where they conduct human in the loop evaluation and alignment of conversational large language models. They are passionate about AI literacy, the role of linguists in demystifying AI hype, increasing the representation of social scientists in tech, and leveraging sociolinguistic insights to develop actively affirming and truly representative large language models. So, a lot of things. We have a lot to discuss. So, Lex, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing with us your experiences.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joelle, and thanks for the invitation. And yeah, hello to everyone at LangBytes. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So, before we go into your experiences, your academic, we have your random question. And you see me? Come back.
I can, yes.
Your random
I
question.
think that, sorry, the internet connection, I think, blipped for a second
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
Joelle. But sorry, go ahead.
Great. So your random question is, what country you haven't visited yet and you would like to go to?
Mm, I love this question. I think it's actually a pretty easy answer for me. The number one country that comes to mind that I haven't had the opportunity to visit yet, but would love to, is Turkey. Turkish
Ooh,
food is, I mean, it's like one of my favorite cuisines on the entire planet, if not my absolute favorite. And when I moved to Toronto, I got to have my first experience of Turkish brunch because there are some really beautiful Turkish brunch spots here in Toronto. And so the food, of course, is a huge draw, but also I think Istanbul is an incredibly gorgeous city, and I've always wanted to go. So that is my number one dream country destination.
interesting. So it will be
Hmm.
more related to the food, not to pleasure.
Honestly, I when I think of travel, I do tend to think with my stomach a little bit. So definitely, the food is a huge draw. But yeah, also just like as a place to get to explore, I think would be so incredible.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What about you, Joelle?
Um, I think I would go to. I think I would go to Korea.
Ooh, nice. Yeah,
Mas- Basically because I love K-drama, K-pop. I like their food. I like their culture. So it would be nice
classic.
to be like in the
Yeah,
place that everything is born there.
yeah, absolutely.
But
Yeah,
also
for
like
sure.
other Asian cultures, I would love to go to Japan because they are very technological and I would like to
Mm.
see how that works.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like the most sophisticated rail system, I think, in the world. That'd be incredible to
Yeah.
see. Yeah, yeah.
And since you think with your stomach, like thinking about traveling, I
Yeah.
think Brazil should be your second option too.
Oh, Brazil is up there. Brazil is absolutely up there. Actually, there's an incredible Brazilian restaurant right underneath my house.
Oh,
That yeah, it's absolutely out of this world. Well, it's run by two partners who, shout out to Oh My God Tapas in Toronto, I guess. Two
Mhm.
partners, one of whom is from Portugal and the other is from Brazil. So it's sort of like a Portuguese, like, pan Portuguese fusion place. It's outstanding.
Nice.
So maybe I will make it someday.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. If you come to
Mhm.
Brazil, tell me, and then we can meet up.
You bet.
Okay, nice. So now we're gonna move on to the career academic background questions. The first question would be, can you give us a summary of what you studied in your PhD? Because in the bio you said you studied a little bit of sociolinguistics and discourse
Mhm.
analysis, but what specifically?
Yeah, for sure. So as it was mentioned in my short bio there, I finished quite recently. So I defended my PhD actually a year ago next week,
Oh,
at the
nice.
beginning of
Congrats.
April. Yeah, thank you. My first anniversary. So my PhD is in linguistics. I also had a cross specialization in sexual diversity studies. So I primarily worked within the subfield of queer and trans linguistics in particular, but I'm a sociolinguist by training. So my dissertation was on linguistic strategies in gender affirming care contexts. So it was a study of doctor-patient communication, how trans people and their doctors, bridge knowledge gaps on trans identity through language, how language varies and changes within trans communities, and how that kind of makes its way into healthcare settings. So it was a combination of a few different approaches. Sociolinguistic interviews, discourse analysis of a few different flavors, critical discourse analysis for folks who might be familiar with that, but also computer mediated discourse analysis as well, which is something that I was really
Mm,
interested in. Yeah. So a little bit of topic modeling, latent Dirichlet allocation. I was always really very interested in language variation and change. That was kind of my entry point into the field of linguistics originally, actually. And so my research program over time really centered around that kind of as a bit of an anchor. And language variation and change as a field also kind of incorporated, I didn't really realize this until towards the end of my graduate degree, and I was looking into, transitioning into industry, but the field of language variation and change kind of incorporated a lot of classical machine learning techniques as well in modeling how language varies and changes over time, and building kind of predictive models that account for the linguistic choices that individuals make. So that ended up being a really fascinating and kind of unexpected bridge for me. So that's kind of a little bit about my research background, but I dabbled in a few other things as well. I had a fun project for a while on. I was saying this was something I didn't realize until closer towards the end of my grad studies, when I was getting ready to make a transition into industry. But the field of language variation and change also, relied on, in a lot of ways, traditional machine learning techniques like logistic regression, linear regression. So these kinds of tools, which were so familiar to me in the context of linguistic analysis, then took on this kind of whole other dimension when I moved into industry as well. So yeah, that's I guess a little bit on my background as a sociolinguist, and
nice.
um, one who kind of tried to, I guess, wherever possible, kind of incorporate some computational approaches as well.
And were you able to employ like quantitative analysis or only qualitative?
Definitely both. Sometimes both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes one or the other, depending on the project. For my dissertation, it was a little bit of a mix of both. So I did
Nice.
a qualitative discourse analysis for some of the data, and then for others, I did kind of more large scale topic modeling, which was much more quantitative in nature. And that was always something that I was super curious about throughout my studies as well, is how can we support each of these perspectives with the other? How can they potentially be mutually enriching? And so I had lots of opportunities, definitely as a researcher, to experiment with them individually and together. And that, yeah, is something that now I get to do for work as well, which is a cool change. Yeah.
Nice.
Mhm.
Great. And now, you finished your PhD last year, and now you're at Meta. How was that transition from academia? And probably, like most people would like to have a tenure track job, but now you are now in one of the most big technology company.
True. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I should say as well that I'm actually I do work at Meta. I'm contracted to Meta via a tech contracting company, which is quite common for a lot of roles in the tech industry. But day to
Hmm.
day, absolutely, I'm embedded within Meta, which has been definitely a really incredible learning experience, and has been, a wonderful introduction to certainly the generative AI and the large language modeling space in the tech industry. My journey kind of in there is kind of a funny one. I kind of like to say that I fell backwards into it in some ways. It was almost a little bit accidental. So in the last year of my program, I was preparing to teach my last course. And I was getting really excited to kind of spend the last semester that I thought that I would, teaching in a university classroom. And this is when ChatGPT exploded in November of 2022, when it really kind of took off. And there were a lot of concerns in higher education. Certainly, like my colleagues around me were expressing a lot of panic, actually, about the state of higher education, about how our role as instructors was basically done and dusted. It was completely over. Now everything could be answered by this algorithm. And so I partnered with a really incredible colleague at U of T, Professor Nathan Sanders, and we collaborated on this project on how our teaching methods needed to adapt to this emergent language technology. Was it really the case that it was
Nice.
actually as disastrous as some maybe feared it was? And how could it potentially be leveraged or incorporated to augment student learning experiences as well? So over the summer of my final time in the program, or I guess shortly after I defended as well, we were working on this project, collaborating with faculty members in the department, and taking a look at assessments, and providing feedback, and experimenting with ChatGPT. And it was incredible for a lot of reasons. I mean, long story short, we did not find that education as we knew it was ending, perhaps unsurprisingly. But it did give me an opportunity to really dig into the literature on, natural language processing, trends in natural language processing. Gave me the opportunity to get this really high level state of the field, get engaged with some upskilling courses along the way. And so actually, when I was contacted by a recruiter it was kind of accidental in that way. So yeah, a little bit nonlinear, but that's, yeah. Did we have an internet connection issue again as well, Joelle?
We did, but we got everything.
Okay, okay, that's good. I'm wondering if it's my internet connection,
I think
or
it's mine,
oh no.
but that's yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay, we'll make it work. That's
Um,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, great. But um, how, since you moved into the industry, now you're in Meta, you said it was accidentally,
Mm,
you researched the literature and etc. But how was the decision making of leaving academia? Because
mm,
this for people who are so inserted and so deep into the academic life can be
Yeah.
very hard to do because everybody and everything says you should stay in academia, even
Yeah.
though there is not much jobs for many but
Yeah.
jobs for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
How was
That's
this
so true.
process for you?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it was challenging. It was very tough. There was a lot to figure out, and I think you're exactly right. Like the messaging is very very strong within academia. Not only that, our programs are preparing us for exclusively this one career path, which exactly as you say, unfortunately, there aren't enough jobs for all of us, who might want to become academics, and that's if folks want to become academics in the first place. But I think also there's a second piece as well that can be really challenging to work through, and that I needed to, I think, process in my own way in some ways as well, which is that leaving academia is somehow less. What's the word I'm looking for? Like less ethical, or maybe it's selling out in some way. Like you're kind of you're leaving the ability to um, maybe practice the research skills, or pursue the interests that you have as a graduate student. That's something that's only possible within the context of academia, and it's also something that you can only do in like an ethical way inside of academia. And so when I connected with linguists who were working in industry already, who recommended all of these really wonderful organizations as well to get in touch with, that are, that interface with, humanity and technology, like All Tech is Human being one example, the Algorithmic Justice League, of course, being another one, the DARE Institute as well being another. I realized that actually there are linguists who are in industry who are advocates for linguistics, who are advocates for the humanity and the technologies that we're building. And it just kind of really showed me that there is another way. I think there is another way to practice linguistics,
Yeah,
right? And
that's one of
and
the purpose of this video cast.
yes, I love that. Yeah, that's incredible. And like that's also part of why I was so excited to chat, because I do think, like, I think that's that's a way that we're socialized in academia, that I think is harmful both inside and outside of the academic context for all sorts of different
Hmm.
reasons. But it's something that you kind of you need to sometimes get out of your system a little bit. I think when you decide to leave and you accept, maybe for yourself, that that's the right decision for you. So it was, yeah, it took quite a bit of time. I would say probably like the last entire year of my program. That was something that I was kind of thinking about and processing. I also connected with like a PhD, like a post PhD kind of like career coaching
Hmm. Nice.
organization. Yeah, yeah, it was called PhD to Life. Yeah, and it was a really wonderful community. Honestly, the best part about it was, I think, just like having a space to connect with other people who
Mhm.
were also navigating that transition, and who were also even still undecided as well. Like, I think that's something that I wasn't expecting, that I guess I was still in some ways kind of thinking about it in a
Mhm.
binary way: you're in or you're out. But there were so many other people who were like me, who were like, well, like, I'm not totally sure. Like, I have these kinds of aspirations, or I have these kinds of, like, desires for the lifestyle that I'd like to lead, or where I'd want to live. And but at the same time, like, I don't want to leave behind this
Yeah.
community that I've cultivated for so long.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a process, and it's sometimes a challenging one. But definitely, the more other linguists and the more other folks who have made the transition I connected with, like, the more human and the more possible it felt, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And also think what makes what makes it hard to like make this disconnection from the academic
Mm,
world is that we don't see, um, or at least, yeah, we don't see many linguists like publishing things like it worked,
Hmm.
or even
Yeah.
though it worked, they don't publish it. They don't
Yeah.
share with the community.
Right.
And then with at least here in Brazil, we think that linguists are people for like teaching languages, and that's it.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
And then if you see, I think if you see all the examples that worked,
Hmm.
and also the ones that didn't work,
Hmm.
you can see what you can do and where you can go, and who you can network with,
Hmm.
and then you can see some kind of direction that you can follow to make this
Yeah.
to get out of the nest that
Yes.
academia made for you.
Yeah. Yes, yes, that's so true. And like I think like the networking piece is so crucial as well, right? And I'm sure you've heard this advice before, like networking, everything in industry is about networking. I think
Mm,
everything in academia is also about networking as well, but we're just so used to it that we don't call it that, right? We talk about going to a conference, or we talk about going to a research group, or we go to a seminar, even something as simple as like going to
yeah.
an office hour of a faculty member in your department. That's networking, right? Like
Hmm.
we do have all those skills. So I think, and I think also like kind of to your point as well, Joao, about like how we don't see it. I think that's why I think it's so important for linguists who have moved beyond academia to remain in connection with those who are in academia, so that we can say like, hey, like if you want an example of something that's possible to demonstrate to your students, send me an email. I'd love to come and chat with them, because I think that showing students of linguistics that there are so many different ways to be a linguist. There's so many different ways to practice that. I think it really makes it feel so much more possible, so much earlier than maybe it has for some of us.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. And
Hmm.
going back to the networking piece of our conversation,
Mm.
I can speak from my experience. All the industry jobs that I got, it was through personal branding and networking.
Yep.
None
Yep.
of it was like I applied somewhere and
Yep.
I got a job. It
That's right.
was through networking and personal branding on LinkedIn. So
Hmm.
it's an
Hmm.
important piece of advice.
Definitely. Definitely. Always.
Um, Now I think everybody's curious to know what exactly you do at Meta, because your
Mm.
job title is quite big, like language engineering team lead and
Hmm.
research and development linguist. Like a
Hmm. Hmm.
very fancy words, and I think it is a very fancy job, but we would like to know what actually it entails.
Right, right, for sure. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's so basically like my team at Meta. So I work on the persona project at Meta. So for folks who might not be familiar, the Meta's personas, they're like a suite of conversational agents. They're tailored to kind of a range of different domain interests. So there's they also have celebrity partnerships, who kind of play each of these characters, I guess. So,
Yes.
for example, there's like there's a sports character guy, who has the likeness of Tom Brady, and then there's also like a dungeon master, like fantasy character, who's played by Snoop Dogg, and like a mystery adventure character who's played by
Ooh.
Paris Hilton. Kind of uncanny, but basically they're kind of they're conversational agents. They're available across like the suite of Meta's platform. So my team is part of the persona team, as part of Meta's generative AI. So we're basically responsible for the human in the loop evaluation of model alignment. So basically, what that means is like we are testing the models for a range of different criteria depending on whatever the stakeholder needs are. So we assess things like linguistic fluency, linguistic naturalness, which for a linguist is a fascinating question to get to dig into. It's an empirical question, like, great, how do you evaluate naturalness? What even is naturalness at the linguistic level, right? Also, things like successful integration of certain product features, right? Sometimes they're trying to do something innovative in that respect, and want to see how that
Mm-hmm.
kind of integrates into the language system, into the foundation models. So we, day to day, what this means is that we're kind of designing and
Mm-hmm.
implementing a range of different analyses to
Yeah.
test these
And
different aspects.
is your team like a group of, for example, freelancers or like employees at Meta?
So my team, we're contracted to Meta. So we are contracted via a contracting company called Tech Systems, but there's loads of different equivalent companies out there.
Mm-hmm.
Folks
Mm-hmm.
might have heard of some of them before.
Yeah.
Scale AI is another example. So everyone on my team is also are also via Tech Systems as well. So we're our own kind of cohesive unit within Meta, but we collaborate with various stakeholders who
Like,
are actually in full-time roles at Meta, usually in leadership roles throughout
yeah.
engineering, data science, that sort of thing.
And do you is your team like linguists or do you have a mix?
Yeah, we have a mix, which is incredible. That's I think one of my favorite things about the role, to be honest. So I'm one of the team leads. So I'm the language engineering team lead, and basically everybody on our team is classified as a prompt engineer. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about prompt engineering and how that intersects with linguistics, because there's definitely a lot to dig into there. It's kind of a bit of a Swiss Army knife of a term at the
Mm-hmm.
moment. It means so many different things. But so our team is kind of a mix of like technical and creative folks, because while we definitely do, we do a lot of more technical, qualitative and quantitative analysis. We do a fair bit of data science on the team for sure. We also do, some model training and fine tuning as necessary
Mm-hmm.
for some additional side projects, and various kinds of like automation tooling and things like that. But also because we do provide human annotation data to guide model training, we also have a significant portion of folks who come from creative writing backgrounds, copywriting backgrounds, much more creative perspectives, really, really different, right? Than what I'm used to. Certainly, in terms of I was used to interacting with pretty much mostly linguists day to day. So there are linguists on my team. There are folks who have computational linguistics backgrounds, but there are also folks who come from English backgrounds, or who are novelists as well. We've got a few novelists on the team.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a real blend for sure. Yeah.
Great. And I would like to tackle a little bit about the success in this field, or you can
Mm,
talk about your team as well,
yeah.
because you have experience as being like an operational and analytical linguist,
Mm,
but also now you have the experience as a team lead or a team
mhm,
manager. What would you say are the most critical skills for a linguist in the industry?
mm, mm. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think so. I mean, I think I should preface it by saying that it definitely really depends on the organization. It kind of depends maybe on the industry a little bit. So I can speak at least to the kind of the conversational AI domain. Um,
Mhm.
it is really it's kind of new in a lot of ways. My boss told me once, like, we're building the airplane as we're flying it sometimes. But I think there are actually some really essential skills that linguists typically have, that they're already bringing to the table, that are huge assets in this space. I think some of the maybe soft skills, for lack of a better term, definitely just curiosity, right? Enthusiasm for linguistic data gets you really incredibly very, very far. Being maybe a little bit creatively minded, being really adaptable. Of course, the speed of industry is a little bit different from what some folks might be used to in academia. Personally, I find that quite refreshing. It's really nice to know that I'm going to be working on something maybe slightly different every day. And also strong communication skills as well, because there's a lot of
Mm,
cross-functional collaboration, right? It's the teams are not especially insular, at least not in my experience. You're often going to be working with folks in engineering, in data science, in
mm, mm.
product,
And
in marketing. Yeah.
sorry, but I think this is a advantage we have as linguists.
Yes.
We
Yes.
tend, not everybody, but we
Hmm.
tend to communicate clearly or
Hmm.
clearer than people from other backgrounds or from STEM, for example. But we
Yeah.
tend,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
generalizing,
Yeah.
because we study language. So
Yes.
it's
Yes.
like a consequence of doing that.
Totally. And I think also, I mean, I return I found myself, like, throughout, like I mentioned earlier, I'm really in kind of the first year, I guess, of my career outside of academia. And something that I've definitely returned to often throughout that time is the idea of translation, honestly. And being able to effectively communicate core concepts in
Mhm.
different language and different environments, right?
Yeah.
Because another thing that I noticed about industry is that, like, you need to nail the framing. I think in order to really get your message across, you've got to put it in the terms that your audience are going to understand. You've got to take a real audience design approach, which of course to us as linguists is
Mhm.
typically, and again, I agree. I join you in not generalizing, but tending, like, we tend to be very, very good at that. And when I started to think about it that way, it felt a lot easier for me as well, right? To
Mhm.
think about, I'm going to align this to the language that my audience
And
is
that's
more
what
familiar
we
with.
call style switching.
That's it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Master style shifters linguist. So again, like, I think this is something that, like, we already have a leg up on.
Mhm.
Likewise, this analytical perspective too, this level of analytical attention to detail. I think we take for granted to a certain extent in linguistics because it's our
Yeah.
bread and butter, right? Like, we're used to dealing with these really granular pieces of language that
Yeah.
for a lot of people really genuinely do go completely unnoticed.
Yeah.
And even folks who do engage with language very often in different ways, like, say, maybe folks who are
Mhm.
maybe coming from more of a creative writing background, like, they don't even necessarily
Yeah.
have that analytical level, that ability to look at language in a compositional way,
Mhm.
in a structural compositional way, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I also think that there is something to be said about when you have like an academic background.
Mm,
My case, a master's; in your case, doing a PhD, because the academic language has its problems, but it
right.
forces you to write clearly.
Mm, mhm,
And I
mhm,
think, of course, you won't use academic language at your job.
mhm,
I think you have a mindset like I have to write everything clear, direct, objective, um,
mhm,
concise, coherent,
mhm,
cohesive.
mhm,
And I think,
mhm.
and that's one of the transferable skills that you can put in an
Oh, yeah.
industry job. So,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, like, technical reporting too, I think, is a huge one. Like, the ability to, look at, let's say, like a spreadsheet full of data, to look at some rudimentary data visualizations and put together, like a 500 word maximum description of it. Like, for folks who come from an academic background, I think that is a much more approachable task. Sometimes I
yeah.
remember within the first, I think it was within the first maybe 2 weeks that I had started at Meta, one of my team leads at the time said, "Oh, yeah, like, we need actually like a literature review on this. Can you maybe, like, find like a paper or two and get some and just like write up some notes on it and have that to us by the end of the day. And I was like, I can probably have that to you by noon. You only need me to read two papers. That's it. Like can read the abstract of two papers and then summarize that. And, like I could do that in a heartbeat. But so I think like that's kind of also what I was saying about the speed being a little different. But it is when you're used to having things on such a longer timeline, and all of a sudden when the scope is much smaller, even though the timeline is much smaller, it's like, wow, this is something I know how to do
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
That's
So, I mean, those are some of the I guess maybe softer skills, so to speak. But there are some technical skills that are advantageous as well. I could speak to those if you think that's worth
Yeah, I
discussing.
think you
Also,
can mention some. I think people would
okay.
be interested in knowing those.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it really does depend on the role,
Hmm.
exactly how technical, the involvement might be expected to be. But definitely some basic data science is, of course, very helpful. The ability to put together some descriptive statistics, data visualizations, whether in Excel or Google Sheets or R. Python and other coding languages are, of course, always an asset, but they're not necessary. They can definitely really come in handy, especially when it comes to maybe automating certain tasks and stuff like that. But in general, like a grasp of quantitative methods, in addition to the kinds of analytical details that linguists are already so inherently geared towards, that and maybe a little bit of experimental design as well, can all be really really helpful. But which one is the most important to focus on will be dependent on the role for sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And this is what I'm gonna say, something that I said before in previous episodes. But if you're gonna be a computational linguist and you wanna study like the computational part, you want to study data science, statistics,
Mm,
that's totally fine. But you have to up your game in
mm.
linguistics. Don't be
Yes.
flat. Don't be flat on the linguistics part as well.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
should keep studying. Of course,
yeah.
maybe not on the same. Maybe you don't have to put the same hard work that you have to do to study data science because you're gonna start from zero.
Hmm,
But
hmm.
you shouldn't left linguistics. You shouldn't leave
Yes.
it out of the equation. You know.
Yes, and you don't have to, I think, either, which is the incredible part because, I mean, the field of NLP is really very well established, and so you actually, I mean, you can approach any of the data science upskilling like from that NLP angle, and already some of the linguistics will be built in. But I think
Mhm.
also like thinking about developing those skills as a linguist can be really helpful too. Like I think a breakthrough that I had, I always used like bare minimum Python throughout my grad studies. I used it for like very specific research tasks exclusively. And so when I was done, I was like, okay, like this is one of the first things that I really need to level up. And the breakthrough moment I had was like, oh my god, like Python is just a language. Like it's a computer language. It's not a human language, which I may be more used to dealing with, but it's still a language, right? And so if you think about it from the perspective of like, think about it from the grammar too, right? Just step back and maybe learn a little more about like object oriented programming as well, right? I think it makes it feel so much more contained. And if you put it in that language box, I think it feels much less intimidating. At least it did for me. So that's
Uh,
an encouraging tip I might share with the audience also.
yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. And I wanna go back to something you said on your bio, and I think you talked about a little bit during your answers.
Mm,
How you connect generative AI and sociolinguistics.
mm,
I think
mm.
is something that both of us will be very interested in.
Yes.
Um, so, what's your opinion about it?
Mm,
How do you study language through the social lens can inform the development of responsible and
mhm,
unbiased
mhm,
LLM?
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. I mean, I
Big
like we
question.
could.
You can do 5 PhDs on that.
Yes,
But
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, well, I'll come back next week. We'll pick up the conversation again. We'll keep it going. So many different ways for sure. I mean, there are so many different threads between the two, and honestly, I feel like the longer I spend in tech as well, the more of those threads I see. I did talk about this previously, but yeah, for sure. Like for me, being at the intersection of linguistics and LLM development or generative AI more broadly means for sure being an advocate for linguistics, and also being an advocate for linguistic justice as well. The thing about
mm,
large language models, I think, that is really worth noting in relation to linguistics is that, I mean, this is a huge breakthrough in AI technology, right? And at its core, it is fundamentally a linguistic breakthrough, right? It is a breakthrough in our ability to communicate with computers in our language as opposed to human language. And so that eliminates, depending on the task that we're talking about, depending on the use case, that can eliminate a ton of barriers. But also, depending on, again, the use case and also the communities who will be interacting with that technology, can also create a lot of barriers as well. So, of course, like a sociolinguistic approach is, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is how it can be supportive in identifying biases in linguistic data, right? Biases are often they're baked into conversational language models at a deep level. So not just at the contentful level, in terms of maybe hateful terms that are used, creating a propensity for harmful representations of individuals, but also not just what is said by models, but how it is said by models too, right? So not just don't say hateful things, but also don't represent social groups in inaccurate or stereotypical ways, right? When we think about things like,
mhm,
variety, accessibility, the kinds of when we think about conversational AI and conversational AI agents like chatbots, right? Like what kind of link is being made between the supposed identity of this model and its linguistic output, right? How does that map on to our social categorizations that we do as human beings through language as well? At the linguistic level, I think that's definitely a really important thread, but also something that I'm, becoming really increasingly, I shouldn't say fanatical, but very animated about, is the climate justice perspective as well, and the way that climate justice and language justice are intertwined. And Emily Bender and her colleagues have argued this point previously much more eloquently than I could. But when we think about what kinds of technologies, what kinds of communities will be able to access these language technologies, will be able to access large language models, they're the communities who probably won't be able to access it in their language, but who will bear some of the worst effects of the climate impacts that result from their development. So, especially
ooh,
because as large language models, right, they are trending towards getting bigger. I don't know if you've noticed this as well, Joao, but in the literature, the general consensus is that we want the models to be bigger and bigger in order to improve their performance. Not only should the model itself be larger, but the data that are used to train it should also be larger, right? The more parameters we can give it, the more expansive a range of tasks it could potentially be fine-tuned for, right? And there are a couple problems with this. The first being that there's a huge climate impact to these large training data sets. There was a paper, I think it was within the last few years, that actually some scientists at MIT measured the carbon impact of training an NLP model. And they found that training one NLP model produced the equivalent carbon emissions as 5 average American cars, the lifetime emissions of 5 cars. And that's one NLP model. So, which is that's a huge carbon footprint, an absolutely tremendous carbon footprint. And the data that are being used to train these models are also primarily coming from the internet, right? Because it's just a
Mhm.
buffet of data that's available out there that you can scrape, and hopefully not entirely without consequences going forward. But at this point, certainly, a lot of large tech companies are just heaping that on. But the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of data on the internet are available in only one of 10 languages, right? So we're trending towards a situation where we want bigger and bigger language models that require larger and larger amounts of data to train. But the amount of data that we have to do that, to build those state of the art models, are only within 10 languages, which is like, not even big enough to be referred to as a drop in the bucket of the world's linguistic diversity. So we're going to be building foundation models, the state of the art models that are only available, they're only going to be possible in these 10 languages. So these kinds of, I think, structural sociolinguistic dynamics, right? The ways that the politics of language are also embedded in LLM development. I think this is one of the most important ways that language in its social context does inform it, right? Because when we think about who is going to have access to this technology, is it essential technology, especially given the fact that everybody's rushing to find an LLM solution to everything, right? We want to automate everything, replace as much as we can with conversational AI. What does it mean for that to only be
Mhm.
possible in
Yeah,
10 languages, right? And this
I
is where
think
I think linguists need to engage for sure.
yeah. I think there is a problem like of let's say social community. What type of social
Mm,
communities will have access to that? For
mm,
example, underprivileged people probably won't have, or they will have much slower access, or they like just a little access to the AI products.
mhm,
But also linguistic communities,
mm,
saying, for example, people who um, the LLM so far, they are for written languages or oral
yes,
language. They don't have sign languages yet.
yes, yes, yes.
So they are developing bigger and better models for written oral languages.
Mhm, mhm,
Sign
mhm,
language, um, deaf people, they don't have
mhm,
anything,
mhm,
and
mhm,
they have to have this kind of process of like second language acquisition that they have to learn how to read and write. They should
mhm.
they should have also something on their language.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Actually, I follow a few deaf AI developers on LinkedIn who have showed some like incredible technologies and resources on this too. And I think that's such a good point as well. Like the that modality bias as well that gets
Mhm.
baked into.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I
yeah.
I know a company in Brazil actually. The name is Hand Talk. I discovered it
Mm,
like this week. They have a AI product in which, if I understood correctly, they have a AI agent can who can signs in
mm.
Brazilian sign language
Oh,
and can be the translator and interpreter for conferences or like business conversations.
oh wow,
Yeah,
interesting.
so I think
Yeah.
that's nice too. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
in very slow baby steps, but
Yep,
it is something.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Can I turn that sorry, Joao. I was
Go
wondering
on.
if I could turn that question around on you too. Like I was
Yeah, yeah,
because because you said like you also have this relationship to both computational and sociolinguistics. What do you see as some of the crucial intersections there? Like what comes to mind for you as well?
yeah. Okay, great. Since you gave like let's say discourse sociolinguistic approach, I
Mm,
think we'll go a little bit on the language variation
ooh,
direction.
cool. Yeah.
Um, once I've read a LinkedIn post uh, from somebody. I think they worked on Grammarly,
Mm, mm,
and they said that Grammarly was and grammar is powered by an AI. Um, Grammarly was always giving the suggestion from to change in order to only the word to,
Mm-hmm.
and then the person who wrote the post was wondering if this would be something that if this would be an influence of AI changing the way people write in
Uh-huh.
like in order to would be something obsolete, something that
Right.
people won't use anymore because AI is always asking
Yeah.
them to make it
Right.
shorter.
Right.
Um, so I think it can be something if we don't have AI literacy. This type of
Mm-hmm.
thing can happen. Um, Very interesting as well. I saw a post today, yesterday actually, about someone who wrote the most um, the most frequent adjectives that ChatGPT likes to use,
Mm-hmm.
and then the first one was commendable,
Interesting. Okay.
and there is like a list of I think 100 adjectives that the ChatGPT likes to use,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I've noticed the list. Like if you see the list and if you see a text with those adjectives, almost immediately you say the person didn't write this.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right.
Um, so I think again, it can have some type of language variation or language change, but I think it would happen on the written language because oral language I think could be very hard to AI to change it because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we decide what we say and how we say it.
Mm-hmm.
And AI is very far yet from modeling prosody, uh,
Oh.
a few segmental processes as well. So I think it
Mm-hmm.
would be
Mm-hmm.
very hard for it to
Mm-hmm.
influence that deep into the language. But at least
Yeah.
in written language, I think it can have something to
Yeah.
analyze there. But again, we would have to have like years and years of
I
AI to
know.
figure out if that's gonna happen.
Yeah. I hope
Um,
there's going to be a dissertation of the future on that.
yeah, I hope to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but also, um, as you said, there is something to be said about biases, um, especially. Um, I think it is. I think it will be very transparent, image generation. If you say to an AI, for example, I want a photo of a doctor, it's gonna
Mm-hmm.
be a white man.
Right. Yeah.
If you want a nurse, it's gonna be a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And in Portuguese, you can have this distinction because in Portuguese you have the inflection of gender. You can say a doctor female, a doctor male, but it's within the word doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But in English, you don't know. It's kind of a neutral term.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to do like as a male doctor, for example, it says something about the motto itself.
Right.
But I don't think, and that can be a hot topic, but we should try to mitigate those problems in the models, but we should
Mm.
get to the root of the problem, which is how people treat each other. Because
Mm.
the model is only repeating what we say.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not creating an idea that the doctor should be a male. We
Yeah.
created the idea that the doctor should be a male.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Absolutely.
we should change it. Of course, we should not propagate um, stereotypes or bad representations, but
Mm-hmm.
we should focus on the real problem as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Like, it's funny. Yeah, I love that you say that, Joelle, because actually, I was chatting with some colleagues at work earlier today about this There's been some posts, some like Medium articles going around the internet talking about how large language models are more likely to fulfill a request, like if the user is polite, like if they say please, right? If they
Yes,
frame
yes.
things as a request rather than an instruction, right? Oh yeah, I'm sure you've come across this as well. And so I've been thinking a lot about this quote, humans will come to treat each other the way they treat their machines. So I've been thinking a lot as well about how the way that we may be becoming socialized to communicate with these models as well, that are increasingly anthropomorphized, right? That are sometimes anthropomorphized by design also. How the way we talk to them affects how we understand those underlying social concerns, right? Yeah, I'll pick it back up. Yeah, yeah. So the way that these models are becoming anthropomorphized, such that the boundaries maybe between what is human communication, what is human computer communication, is getting a little bit blurred, right? And in many ways, that's to tech companies' benefit.
Mhm.
But I think about that as well, about how our interactional dynamics with these models might also impact the interactional dynamics that we have with each other too,
I have
right?
something to add about that then.
Ooh, yes.
Um, I read an article, like a newspaper article, saying that I think it's Gen Z. The
Hmm.
Gen people, they prefer to ask for advice, career advice, for ChatGPT than to
Yep.
their it's not something about Gen Z, but this is something to be said about the managers.
Mm. Oh, yeah. Oh no.
Because if you
Oh,
can
Joel.
ask a career, is happening.
Hmm.
Can you hear me? Hey,
Hmm.
I
Oh,
said
it paused.
if
It paused for a second again.
okay, if you can if you can't ask for advice to your manager, what is their purpose there then?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of like getting at the question of like, what interactional situations do we envision this technology fulfilling,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, like I gave a talk recently at a local conference, and kind of introduced the idea of like the algorithmization of conversation, right? The idea of a conversation as something that can be reduced to algorithmic predictive text, effectively, right? And the kinds of use cases that already I think we're seeing for this technology, I think it does warrant like deeper investigation into what kinds of gaps are already present. And I think that maybe circles back a little bit to what we were talking about the relationship with sociolinguistics as well. I would
Mhm.
love to see like a sociolinguistics, like a techno sociolinguistics almost, that's kind of considering that, right? Considering like, here's what we know about the human to human interactions in this domain, and like how really is an algorithm improving that? Is it improving that? And if it's not, why are we using it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Great. Um, Lex, I think we are almost going to the end of the episode. So before we go, I would like to ask you if you have any advice
Mm,
for uh, aspiring computational linguists or people who are linguists and want to transition to computational linguistics.
hmm.
What advice you can give them?
Yes, yes, for sure. I think really like, I mean, for folks who are maybe coming from academia as well, who have spent a long time in academia previously, I think the first advice that I would give is just like feel all the feelings, like build in as much time as you can to explore, maybe grieve if that's what you need. Um, and also really just connect with other people. I think the main thing that I would advocate for is like, reframing the idea of networking as well as connection. Because, the folks who I met with when I was, beginning this career transition were so warm, so welcoming, so helpful. And every single person I spoke to said, when I was making this journey for myself, I, I relied so heavily on people who came before me, and I'm really excited to pass that on. And that's definitely something that I'm really, always really grateful to be able to say now when I can. So definitely do connect with other linguists, connect with other people who are doing something that even seems like it might not be interesting to you, because you never know. And if nothing else, it's just great to have a new connection in your network to chat with. But also, like, just kind of think about what might call to you, and share that interest with other people. See if they know anybody who has
Mm.
been there before, and definitely, yeah. If anybody who's watching would love to chat, I'm always down to have coffee chats as well. So definitely would love to do that.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really the main one.
Great. If you and now that the podcast has more episodes because of the first season, you can watch the previous episode as well because there are a bunch of people who have different careers, and then you
Amazing.
can see which one you better.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Um, Lex, I think you've asked your questions, right? What do you have?
I actually have some other questions for you. So
Oh,
there was one in particular I was wondering if I could pitch to you, Joao, if we have like a few minutes left still.
yeah, we have. You can choose like
Okay,
the
cool.
one that you want the most and then ask it.
Okay. This is my favorite question to ask other linguists, because I mean, so you said that in Brazil, the assumed career path for a lot of linguists is that they'll become language teachers. Also, in a lot of academic domains, it's assumed that we'll become academics. But either way, like, linguistics is kind of a non-linear career path. It's not something that many of us encounter at a very young age, maybe not necessarily something we learn about in school prior to maybe attending post-secondary education. So I was wondering, when did you first encounter linguistics? When did you first learn that it existed? Like, what's your story of discovering linguistics?
Okay, nice. Well, that's a good story. Um, so here in Brazil, the course is the major is not linguistics. We
Okay.
call we call it letras, translating to English. The literal translation would be letters,
Letters, yeah.
and it's a combination of literature, linguistics, and language teaching.
Mm,
It is a combination of these three areas.
mhm.
And I decided by the end of my high school that I wanted to study letras because of literature, grammar, or what I thought it was grammar, and language teaching, because
Okay.
I had very nice and very good English teachers.
Mhm.
So I decided to study letras with emphasis on English. And then when I really went to the first classes, I was like, I didn't know that I didn't know linguistics existed. So when the professor talked about phonetics and phones and morphemes and
Yeah.
preposition, proposition, semantics, I was like, what is that? And that's fun.
Yeah.
Why everybody never told me about that?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it was on the first classes of my major,
Oh,
and then it linguistics became my favorite subject on my course because I had literature and language teaching, and linguistics was my let's say the one that I was more excited about.
oh yeah. Yeah.
So and then we also had some kind of like elective courses. Whenever possible, I would do linguistic courses, not language teaching or literature.
Oh yeah.
So
Nice.
that's why I that's that's how I discovered linguistics, and that's why I loved it.
That's so cool. So it was like your very first introduction, like the first day where they were telling you like what linguistics was and what it was all about, you were
Yes.
like, I'm in. Yeah,
Yeah. The
that's
the
cool.
the professor was teaching like Saussure or Chomsky. I was like, that's
Oh my
nice.
gosh. Yeah. 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 Wow.
Why did I know that before?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah.
Because I also talked to my language teachers when I was doing high school that I wanted to do letras.
Mhm.
And then I got to college, I was like, why my English, Spanish, and Portuguese teacher didn't tell me about that?
Yeah.
That's
That seems useful.
and one of my Spanish teachers, she had a PhD in phonetics and social
Mhm.
phonetics. I was like, why
What?
she didn't tell me that?
Oh man, she really kept it a secret.
Yeah, she showed me like her PhD dissertation,
Mhm.
but I was like
Yeah.
a bunch of like spectrograms and
Oh my
graphs. I was
gosh.
like, is that letras?
Yeah.
And then I got into letras. I was like, oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
letras.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, right on. Ah,
Yeah,
cool. Well, thanks for sharing, Joanne.
thank you for asking.
Mhm.
So everybody, um, unfortunately, we don't have much time, but thank you, Lex. Thank you very much, first of all, for coming, for accepting the invitation. It was a lovely conversation. I really loved knowing about you, and I know the viewers is gonna love it too. And we could get a lot of tips from you today. At least I could. So thank you very much, and I hope we can keep in touch.
Oh, absolutely. I would love that. Thanks so much for having me, Joao. It's yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation, and yeah, let's stay in touch. Let's keep chatting. Let me know if you ever want to do another special episode on sociolinguistics and Gen AI. Will be there
Nice.
with bells on. Yeah,
Great, great, great.
for
So
sure.
everybody, thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.